Hi, I'm really happy to be with you today to talk about the situation in Israel-Palestine and my work and where we go from here. In May, all over the world was focused on the headlines of these dramatic events of violence between Israelis and Palestinians, violence between citizens inside Israel, this huge military operation in Gaza. And for us here, for Israelis, that seems like ancient history. I mean, we have moved on. But even when there are no headline dramatic events, of course, occupation continues. My organization is providing individual legal aid for Palestinians from the West Bank and East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. And through that lens of, the people who call us for help, it's very clear that in fact, Israel's military rule over the Palestinians is not these dramatic clashes and violence. In fact, for most people, military occupation is a permit bureaucracy. It's the fact that you need a permit from the Israeli military to go anywhere. I mean, to travel from anywhere to anywhere, and even to live in your house, the ID, the color of the ID you have, the registered address, which is decided by the Israeli military, that dictates everything. And much of our work is helping people navigate this bureaucracy. Even once Palestinians that are arrested, that their family members have no idea where they've been taken. There's no way to find them. And then people call us, every day. That's dozens of calls, people calling us to locate family members, even children in detention, that they don't know where they have been taken. So, that's the day-to-day reality for Palestinians. And we in Israel were really celebrating this new government that came in, which calls itself the government of change. And I think inside Israel, there's reason for optimism. It's a very diverse, strange hybrid of parties that have come together in this government, but certainly some of them that are, human rights activists, parties that have been committed to issues that we care about. So certainly when it comes to issues of equality and social justice inside Israel, there is some room for optimism. But Israel's control over the Palestinians, the occupation, is really far down on this government's agenda. I mean, you have very high-profile ministers who are blatantly opposed, ideologically opposed to equality for Palestinians. And even the ministers who should be, from the center or left, nominally committed to these issues, Palestinian human rights is really not a high priority. So I think, we have to, celebrate what deserves to be celebrated and fight and protest what needs to be fought. And that means when it comes to equality inside Israel for Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel to be pushing as much as possible to realize the basic rights to equality, but, other rights for women, gay, lesbian, refugee rights, all of the, dealing with poverty and other social issues, all of those issues that we can and should be demanding from this government to be the government of change. But also, I think, super important to be keeping up the pressure on this government for, that occupation cannot fall off the agenda, that Israel cannot call itself a democracy when it is ruling over millions of Palestinians who have no say in that democracy. The situation here can seem very hopeless. And in terms of a political resolution of this conflict, in the short or even medium term, I think it really is a bit hopeless. And for that reason, then, the approach of human rights organizations. The centering the conversation on justice is so important. This argument, is the two-state solution still possible? Maybe we should be supporting one state. It's a very theoretical and, to my mind, at this point, irrelevant conversation. The question is Israel treating all human beings under its control with dignity? Is it respecting rights? Is it respecting international law? Is it living up to, the Jewish tradition of justice? And where the answer is no, to be pushing for respect for those rights, Israel to be acting in a moral and legal fashion. And in many ways, that the taking out that what I said was the irrelevant conversation about the political solution, it simplifies everything. I mean, you don't need to get bogged down in all of these issues. It then becomes a very simple conversation about basic rights and basic justice that we all are entitled to. And maybe I can give you a little bit of good news in this what seems like hopeless reality, and that is that HaMoked, my organization, actually is successful in a majority of the cases that we are taking up. And that includes individual cases, but also these, more high profile systemic cases. So somebody comes to us because they've been denied a permit to travel abroad or to go to Gaza. Someone from the West Bank wants to, attend a wedding or a funeral of their relative in Gaza. Those individual cases, we're able to get the permits. But even when we challenge, the demographic policies in East Jerusalem, trying to restrict residency rights, we are also successful at expanding the space for residency rights in Jerusalem, pushing back on restrictions, the separation barrier that has cut into the West Bank and is devastating for Palestinian farmers, both getting the individual permits for farmers and pushing back on all of these restrictive regulations. For many people, the sort of work that we are doing is unsatisfying. It's not ending the occupation. It's helping the people that are suffering in the meanwhile. And to my mind, this is tangible work that we can do. There is the Jewish teaching that when you save one person, you have saved a whole world. And I see this every day in our work. It's one person that is able to comfort their family in Gaza, to mourn with them in a funeral, or to get access to their farmlands, to be able to provide for their family, to live safely together in East Jerusalem with their family without fear of deportation. We cannot dismiss even these individual cases, but I think also these are the building blocks for the big picture, for to insist both vis-a-vis the Israeli government, the Israeli military, the Israeli public, that every individual has rights that has to be respected. And I think also for, the international community, of course, no one can be indifferent to what is taking place here. And all of us on the ground here doing this work are subject to, really a climate that is hostile and working to undermine our work. And certainly within the United States, you have those forces that are, trying in any way to silence critics of the occupation, to discredit our voices, to shoot the messenger so that they don't have to engage with the substance of our criticism. So in that climate, it's all the more important that we have voices that come to, amplify our message also in the domestic conversation in the United States. I mean, to be supporting our work and learning about the issues and speaking out and amplifying this message that human rights organizations have to be listened to, and the message that we all have to engage with this message and insist in all of the interactions, the policy conversation between the US administration and Israel, that of course, human rights and occupation has to be central to that conversation. I mean, maybe again, because I know how overwhelming and hopeless the situation can seem, and I often turn, there is this wisdom from the Talmud that says, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, it's not up to us to finish the task. Velo ata ben chorin lehivatel mimena, but you're not free from the obligation to engage with the task. So, I mean, I think what that tells us, we all can do something, and then we all have to do something. I mean, it's not on us to solve the problem, but we can't just close our hearts to the problem and do nothing. And that each of us doing our part, the sum is larger than the parts, and working all together, we can make change. The situation in, all three areas of the occupied territories, the legal situation and the reality for people is quite different. I mean, the reality in Gaza of people living under this very restrictive siege, very restrictive access in and out of Gaza, as opposed to the West Bank, where you have this settler presence and these increasing incursions and takeover by settlements of more and more land, and the situation in East Jerusalem, which theoretically, it has been annexed to the state of Israel, and Israeli law applies there. Theoretically, the reality for Jews and Palestinians in East Jerusalem is that they're all under the same Israeli law, which should be respecting their rights. But of course, the way the law is applied to those two different populations is quite different. And particularly when you're talking about housing rights in East Jerusalem, well, the Israeli government is explicitly working to maintain what they call the demographic balance in East Jerusalem. Demographic balance, that sounds, harmonious, but in fact, it's very aggressive measures to be reducing the Palestinian population and increasing the Israeli Jewish population. And the two ways that they do that, one is trying to restrict residency rights, and the other is on building and planning home demolitions and takeover of Palestinian neighborhoods. On residency rights, HaMoked has been, really at the forefront and succeeded actually in halting what we called the quiet transfer of Palestinians from East Jerusalem. Palestinians no longer lose residency if they move to the West Bank. So residency rights in many ways have been protected, and we had a big and surprising success with this new government that failed to pass the ban on family unification. For 20 years, you've had a ban on family reunification from East Jerusalemites married to West Bankers. You have about 10,000 people living in East Jerusalem without legal status because they're from the West Bank married to East Jerusalemites. Now, for the first time in 20 years, they are eligible to request status. So this was a big achievement recently that we have to build on and make sure that these people get the rights they're entitled to. But the other half of that equation on planning and building, urban planning, home demolitions, takeover of neighborhoods, we've seen more and more aggressive measures, both by settler organizations who claim they're acting independently, but of course there is a lot of coordination and support from elements within the government to be taking over Palestinian homes and evicting Palestinians from their homes. Thanks to the grassroots movement, primarily of Palestinians on the ground, I think the whole world knows this phrase, Sheikh Jarrah, this neighborhood in East Jerusalem, where settlers are trying to evict Palestinians from homes that they were given between 1948 and 1967 on the claim that the land was owned by Jews before 1948. And here you have a very blatant discrimination because Palestinians cannot reclaim land that they owned or homes that they owned. Pre-1948, so it's an absurd situation. I mean, a Jew from West Jerusalem can reclaim a house that he or she owned in East Jerusalem before 1948, but not the reverse. Palestinians living in those areas where they're at threat of eviction owned homes inside Israel before 1948, but have no legal grounds. So in that sense, it's really a blatant injustice. But thanks to this very widespread mobilization and attention, the Israeli government felt pressure that they had never felt before to avoid these evictions in Sheikh Jarrah. And then you have some sort of compromise being worked out in the High Court of Justice, which it seemed, before the big protests in May, it seemed they were poised, it was the last stop in their legal battle that had gone on for years. It seemed clear that there was no hope. Suddenly the government indicated, even Prime Minister Bennett, who does not come from a background that is sympathetic to Palestinian rights, thanks to all of the international attention, indicated that he was also looking for a way to avoid these evictions. So the situation in Sheikh Jarrah legally is different from other areas that are threatened with evictions and even ethnic cleansing, like Silwan, the other area that is very much on the radar of settlers trying to take over. But I think the lesson from all of these cases is the way that grassroots work on the ground here then can be complemented and supported by international advocacy, and that those, that those two pieces together can successfully make change. And I think about tshuva for looking at the coming year and American Jews coming to the high holidays. I think it's hard for us to hear Palestinian voices, to hear criticism of Israel and of the Jewish community. The instinct is to be very defensive, to try to find ways to undermine, to dismiss critical voices. And the voices coming from Palestinians can be harsh. Voices of people who have suffered because of the policies of my government. So it's, it can be difficult for us to open our ears and open our hearts to those voices. And I think that is the work that we need to do to understand where, where we have been supporting injustice. And even supporting injustice by being silent, by not providing support to Palestinians who are trying to be heard, by not supporting Israelis who are doing this work. I mean, I know from my own experience, again, it is painful to understand that the country that you love and maybe thought was, a light unto the nations is not that, and needs itself to repair. And I think that is a process that we all can contribute to be asking hard questions, to be listening to hard, painful answers, to be challenging ourselves, and then to be challenging others in our community, others in our government, and others in the Israeli government that need to make change, and holding them to account. So I wish you all Shana Tova, Gmar Hatima Tova.